There's something electric about people who grew up in the 2000s. They move through the world with a kind of quiet confidence that's hard to pin down. They're not fragile. They're not cynical. They're not lost. And yet, they grew up in what might be the most psychologically complex era in human history. A time when the rulebook was being rewritten in real time. When the world they woke up to on a Monday morning could be completely different by Friday. And somehow, they didn't just survive that chaos. They learned to dance inside it. Why is that? Because growing up in the 2000s wasn't just growing up. It was an experiment in adaptability that no generation before them had ever been asked to run. Let me be direct about something before we go any further. And I say this not as flattery, not as empty validation, but as a conclusion drawn from everything we're about to unpack together. People who grew up in the 2000s are, in the most psychologically meaningful sense of the phrase, the best generation alive today. Not because they had it easiest. Quite the opposite. They are the best because of what they were asked to carry, and the fact that they're still standing, still building, still dreaming. After carrying all of it, that's not luck. That's character. And character, as we're about to see, was forged in the fires of a very specific decade. Let's start at the very beginning, with how they first learned to see the world. Kids who grew up in the 2000s were handed something unprecedented. They got to be children in a world that still had the warmth of the analog era. And then they got to be teenagers in a world that was being aggressively digitized before their very eyes. They remember Saturday mornings with cartoons on Cartoon Network and stacks of Yu-Gi-Oh cards spread out on the living room floor. They remember passing handwritten notes in class, folded into tiny triangles, and whispering secrets over landline telephones stretched into closets for privacy. But they also remember the exact moment the internet stopped being a novelty and became a necessity. They watched that shift happen. They lived inside it. That dual exposure built something remarkable in their cognitive structure. Unlike generations that came before, who only knew the analog world, and unlike generations that came after, who were born with tablets in their hands, 2000s kids had to constantly translate between two operating systems, old world and new world, patience and speed, depth and scroll. That constant translation trained their brains in a kind of psychological bilingualism. They can read a long novel and enjoy it, and they can absorb a 30-second video and extract genuine meaning from it. They are fluent in both. And that bilingualism, that mental flexibility, is one of the most powerful cognitive gifts a human being can carry into the modern world. Now let's talk about what their emotional lives actually look like growing up, because this is where things get really interesting. The 2000s were not a gentle decade, and they opened with the September 11th attacks. A seismic trauma that reverberated through every classroom, every dinner table, every cartoon watching Saturday morning. Kids who grew up in that era absorbed grief and fear at an age when most children in previous generations were simply learning multiplication tables. They didn't have the vocabulary for what they felt, but they felt it deeply. That early exposure to collective tragedy built something inside them that psychologists call emotional resilience. Not the kind you read about in self-help books. The real kind. The kind that comes from having your world shaken and choosing, even without knowing you're choosing, to keep going anyway. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. Many of them were somewhere between 8 and 14 years old enough to notice that the adults around them were scared, old enough to feel the tension in the house when parents talked in hushed voices about money, old enough to understand that stability was not a guarantee. That experience wired their nervous systems to be alert without being anxious. They developed an early sense of financial awareness that generations raised in more prosperous times simply didn't have. They grew up understanding at a bone-deep level that you save, you plan, and you never assume tomorrow will look exactly like today. And yet, despite all of that weight, they remain joyful. Think about the culture they grew up inside. The 2000s were genuinely fun in a way that's hard to fully explain to someone who wasn't there. It was the era of Webkinz and Club Penguin, of away messages carefully crafted with song lyrics to signal your current emotional state. It was sleepovers where someone always brought a Lizzie McGuire DVD. It was burning mix CDs for your best friend and writing the track list on the disc in Sharpie. It was spending an entire summer afternoon on a trampoline in the backyard with no agenda and no documentation, just pure, unrecorded laughter. That joy wasn't passive. It was invented again and again out of nothing. And people who grew up in that kind of creative, low-tech play develop something psychologists call intrinsic motivation, the ability to generate your own happiness without needing an external source to provide it. This is critically important because in today's world, where so much of our entertainment is delivered to us, curated for us, algorithmically selected to keep us scrolling, the ability to create your own joy is becoming dangerously rare. 2000's kids still have it. They know how to be bored and turn that boredom into something. A project, a conversation, a walk, a playlist, an idea. They don't need the world to entertain them. They learned early that they are perfectly capable of entertaining themselves. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention: the social architecture of growing up in the 2000's. Friendships in that era had a completely different texture than friendships today. They were built slowly, in real time, through accumulated shared experience. You knew your best friend's house better than you knew your own. You knew which step on their staircase creaked and which shelf in their kitchen held the good snacks. You'd ridden your bikes to the same gas station so many times the cashier knew your names. Those friendships weren't performed online. They were lived physically, in the same spaces, day after day, year after year. That kind of intimacy creates a psychological foundation that's incredibly difficult to shake. It's why people who grew up in the 2000's tend to have a smaller but fiercer circle of friends. They know the difference between someone who likes your posts and someone who will drive to your house at midnight when something goes wrong. But here's where the 2000's generation separates itself from every other generation in a way that I think deserves far more recognition. They were the first generation to experience the rise of social media, not as adults who could contextualize it, but as teenagers who were still figuring out who they were. MySpace, then Facebook, then YouTube, then Twitter. Each platform arrived like a new wave, and 2000's kids were standing right there on the shoreline, getting knocked down, figuring out how to stand back up, and learning something new every single time. They made mistakes online when the internet still had some grace. They posted cringe-worthy things on Facebook when only 200 people would see it, not 200,000. They learned the hard lessons about digital identity, about oversharing, about the difference between your real self and your performed self early enough that those lessons actually stuck. They carry a kind of digital wisdom that younger generations, raised entirely inside the attention economy, often lack. They know what it feels like to be addicted to validation because they lived through the early version of that addiction before anyone had a name for it, and many of them found their way out the other side. That journey, from digital naivety to digital awareness, gave them something rare: a conscious relationship with technology. They choose when to be online and when to step away, not because a wellness influencer told them to do a digital detox, but because they've lived enough of both worlds to know exactly what they're trading when they trade presence for a screen. They value real conversation because they remember what it felt like before every conversation had a comment section. There's also the matter of what this generation inherited culturally. And this part matters more than people realize. They grew up at the peak of a cultural moment that was genuinely, almost recklessly creative. The early 2000's music scene alone was a collision of styles that should not have worked together and somehow produced some of the most emotionally honest music ever recorded. Emo and indie rock sat next to hip-hop and pop-punk on the same playlist with zero contradiction. They were raised on films that didn't talk down to young audiences, stories that acknowledged that being young was complicated, that growing up hurt, and that the hurt was worth something. They were given art that treated their emotional lives as serious and significant, and that taught them, almost without their realizing it, to take their own inner lives seriously too. That psychological self-awareness is one of the defining characteristics of the 2000s generation. They are emotionally articulate in a way that generations before them often weren't. They grew up just as the conversation around mental health was beginning to open up. They were young enough to absorb that language and make it their own, but old enough to have developed genuine emotional depth before the wellness industry turned every feeling into a product to be sold back to you. They can talk about their anxiety without making it their entire personality. They can acknowledge trauma without being consumed by it. They can sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for a way to numb it. That balance between self-awareness and self-possession is extraordinarily rare, and it is one of the reasons, perhaps the deepest reason, that I believe this generation is the most psychologically equipped to lead us forward. They are not the loudest generation. They are not the most followed. They don't have the nostalgic mythology of the boomers or the cultural dominance of the millennials. But they have something more valuable than any of that. They have perspective. They have range. They have the memory of a slower, quieter world and the skills to navigate a faster, louder one. They have been tested by history, shaped by joy, and refined by loss. And they have come through all of it with their sense of humor intact, which might be the most underrated psychological superpower of all. People who grew up in the 2000s are, in every meaningful way, exactly what this moment in history needs. Not because they are perfect, but because they have been made by imperfection. They know how to hold complexity without being crushed by it. They know how to stay soft in a world that keeps trying to make everyone hard. They know how to hope without being naive, and how to be realistic without losing their warmth. That is not a small thing. In fact, it might be everything. Thank you for going on this journey with me through the psychology of one of history's most fascinating generations. If something in this video stirred a memory, sparked a thought, or made you see yourself or someone you love a little more clearly, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. If you believe in going deeper, in understanding the invisible forces that shape who we are and why we do what we do, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support is what keeps this exploration alive. I'll see you in the next deep dive.